So this presentation is on ethical tools and avoiding plagiarism and focusing on the composition class and the role of composition teaching in this question about avoiding plagiarism. So I want to begin with a short video that I think illustrates So that was a video of Billie Joe Armstrong at a recent concert by Green Day, and it was recorded by my teenage daughter. And in what Billie Joe illustrates was this conflict I think many people feel between what is they don't really want people to take their intellectual property without proper attribution, and then young people like my daughter who just continually recorded it without any consideration, even though Billie Joe's her hero, about what he was asking them to do. And I think this is the dilemma that is these students with these kinds of conflicting attitudes about their own cultural experiences that they're bringing into the classroom. And the composition problem, I think, is expressed here by Diane Pecorari. It said, instead, multilingual composition teachers should focus more on helping students write in a complex intertextual environment. So she's been very critical of efforts to enforce a kind of moral code on plagiarism. She doesn't really even like the concept of it and thinks we're spending too much time talking about it anyway, and that really we're really talking about writing, and in her work particularly on the question about paraphrasing. The publisher's problem is that there are lots of copying going on. And here we see sometimes it's very difficult to figure out what copying is and when does it happen, and that publishers aren't necessarily concerned with what composition teachers are concerned, which is what the pedagogy of it, but rather of stopping it and being able to identify the detection of plagiarism. So that's sort of the problem of a kind of pedagogical problem versus a detection and moral problem. And there are a number of controversies. One is, what is plagiarism in the first place? It's very undefined. It's often undefined even within our Committee on Academic Misconduct words, but teachers bring various definitions about attempting to come up with a number, maybe 3 words. Some students have been taught 3 words per sentence. Some students have been taught 20%. All of these numbers have made it very difficult to define what actually is plagiarism. And then, as is discussed a lot, is the cultural component. What are the student attitudes? And that's simply, as I've tried to point out, this is a culture of being a teenage culture, as represented by my daughter, but it's also the kind of different cultures that are being brought into the classroom from our multilingual students. And thus, given that situation, how then should plagiarism be addressed? Is it a moral issue that could be addressed by identifying extensive copying, or is it a pedagogical issue, as people like Pecorari have argued? And then if there is plagiarism, should it be punished? How should it be punished? Again, is it punished like other writing problems, or is it published like a moral problem, or should it be punished at all? And, this is complicated. It gets more complicated in publishing. Of course, when it talks about self-publishing, which is, I think, a sort of interesting issue, self-plagiarism, which is an interesting issue in regard to taking information from yourself, which is not obviously a violation of intellectual property, but is considered, in some cases, a moral issue. And this is one of the things publishers and for academic writing are particularly interested in. So there are a number of pedagogical and ethical considerations for the composition classroom, and that's kind of where I'm focusing this talk. And so our objectives were in terms of getting our students to understand the controversies over plagiarism and intellectual property, that is, to become part of the conversation that goes on in the academy, and to understand the rhetoric of textual borrowing, why are they borrowing text, how to report and attribute text that they borrow, and then understanding the syntactical and lexical issues for paraphrasing what they borrow, because particularly as a multilingual writer, they may have difficulties in making those kinds of adjustments. Paraphrasing itself is a very complicated issue. And then the problem, of course, that for many people, they don't want to spend the time. This was a major focus we have. So there's a number of tools that have been developed that teachers are very happy and publishers are very happy to use. And what are the issues about the tools? Our concerns with tools, and any tools, it doesn't matter, has to do with what attitude they express toward the student. There's often a sense that students are like when you go to the airport and you're considered a possible terrorist until you go through the checkpoint, and then you're fine. And students who have to submit papers, they may feel they're in that same position. There's an intellectual property issue about using intellectual property. That has been talked about by the courts, but teachers still have a strong feeling that they don't want their students to necessarily contribute to the databases that some of the programs use. And there are pedagogical issues about what is it that identifying copying does. I mean, does it help the student to say, oh, look how much you've copied, or is it make the student too apprehensive and not understand why it is that they're attributing in the first place? To give some examples of these tools, there's one called CopyLeaks, which I haven't really had a chance to look at. It was just recently released, I think, in the last week. And their website says it's our ability to understand the meaning of the text rather than just comparing word to words. Helps teachers easily determine if a student is struggling when it comes to creating work of his or her own. And you can see here that they're trying to adapt to a new sense that teachers have, that plagiarism and copying is part of writing. And of course, this is an issue that's long been discussed, is whether even copying text, and certainly it's part of learning how to write. And it addresses both students and telling them, well, you need to be concerned with what plagiarism how that can help you, and how a checker can help you. And to publishers, of course, who are very concerned with publishing texts that have been plagiarized or taken from, submitted or resubmitted from another source, and really don't have the time or manpower to check it on their own. And for the uses of technology, and CopyLeaks was an attempt at using a new kinds of technology that goes deeper into the word matches. Paraphrased and plagiarized content are no longer able to pass as original forms of text with new detection capabilities. So these tools are promising teachers and publishers a lot in terms of what they can deliver. Perhaps the most well-known, and the one was used at Ohio State. I didn't use it, but a number of my teachers who worked with me used it, and they were very happy with it. And they advertised themselves as the only comprehensive solution for grading assignments, preventing plagiarism, and safeguarding your institute's reputation. And here they're taking, again, what Turnitin has done is create a kind of what business called a moat. That is, they've added a lot of features, so it's not simply a detection program, it's also a program you can use to evaluate text and give teacher comments. And so if you compare it to others, maybe, even though I think the university spends money because to prevent plagiarism, it's not really billed to that. However, unlike copy leaks, you can see here that Turnitin is appealing to the university sense of their reputation and then the importance of their reputation. Counter to this, and that's the sort of top-down version of this question, is this bottom-up version of the question. What kinds of attitudes, as we've said, are students bringing to the classroom? And I think today in composition teaching, there's much more sensitivity to what the students bring to the classroom rather than simply what's imposed from above. So what we found, they often bring really complex attitudes towards both textual borrowing and plagiarism. What we've tried to do is get at our own students' attitudes through surveys and blogs. And there's been a tremendous amount of research on attitudes, and particularly through surveying on what attitudes students have. We felt why we needed more research is that we felt that we wanted to see what our students, rather than students in general, thought, and we wanted specifically to find out what they thought about some of the issues that we knew we were going to be raising in the course. So we looked at surveys, and here's a sample of some of the issues. Probably the main issue we found was there are certainly areas where there were low levels of agreement, that there were controversy, in this case, about the impact of culture on attitudes towards surveying, and then a much higher level agreement on people who felt that plagiarism was considered a problem. And that was one of our cultural issues, was not what attitudes that students had, but how they were being taught before they came. So in this blog that when a Turkish student wrote, he says, I can say that as a student I did not take any training about plagiarism in Turkey. Because of that reason, students never think it is right or wrong, in other words. And so there's a question, is that a cultural concern where there's a difference in the way textual borrowing is viewed, or is it a problem with whether it's considered important enough to be part of a curricula in their schools? Our strategies for dealing with plagiarism in the classroom focused on, firstly, rhetorical strategies for textual borrowing, and that had to do with 6 goals that we had. One was to have understanding the role of attribution, the way textual borrowing is used to support a claim, and the idea that in academic writing, it's not that if you have it's not the originality that's important, it's how it fits in with what other people have already said. The more people who agree with you, and that's shown through citation, the stronger the claim is. It's also a way of opening gaps, that is to show how your research is different or improves upon other people's research. It's a way to demonstrate how you've built your research on previous research, the old standing on the shoulder of giants. It's a way of demonstrating ethos, and this is very important in publishing, which is to demonstrate you're familiar with the key text and you know the difference between older and newer text. And it's a way of providing references for new people in the field or people who want more information about a particular topic. And thus, by using text, students are creating an identity in their own papers through their evaluation of the text, and through this concern with rhetorical writing. That is, that they're writing an argumentative paper. Even in academic research, these papers are argumentative stories that they're being used to prove something. And so it's their text, and they're borrowing text to support their own goals. And the same thing we attempted to look at in new forms of literacy, in multimedia text. That is, again, understanding the attribution of images that they may be borrowing, understanding what is fair use and Creative Commons in terms of taking images from the internet, and of course that's one of the issues I tried to show in the video at the beginning, and understanding what is meant by transformation. And the idea, and which is a key issue in copyright law, which is the idea that by putting a text and an image together, the image particularly becomes transformed into something different. And of course, there's still syntactic and lexical issues that need to be dealt with, as the Plagiarism points out, in terms of paraphrasing, which is a very complicated linguistic writing strategy, and therefore students struggle with it. And of course, that becomes one of the ethical issues. If a student fails to paraphrase adequately and may not attribute adequately, is that a failure of writing, or is that a failure of a moral issue? And as the Plagiarism quote illustrates, there are many, certainly people in composition, who feels it's a writing issue, not a moral issue. So what's going on now in the field of composition? So there's both a kind of loosening or an expansion of the way it's loosening, of the way in which we define plagiarism, what is considered plagiarism and what is not. We use the definition that unless there was evidence of overt copying, we were considering it a writing problem. And thus we're expanding our pedagogical approaches to looking at plagiarism and to having students deal with these problems. So we're changing the approaches both in terms of the kind of rhetoric, the way intellectual property is introduced in the classroom, what students need to know about intellectual property, and what they need to understand about what are considered plagiarism, what is going to get them into trouble in other situations. Thank you.